and we lead off with you.
Obviously, a controversy that we're here to discuss, and my thanks again to the university for understanding that fairness does mean equal number of people and the same amount of time to speak. When we look at this issue of what is marriage, I'd like to start with just some things that perhaps we could all agree on. You know, when we look at science, when we look at the exploration of our galaxy, it's really fascinating to see the astronomers take their gigantic, expensive telescopes and peer into the galaxy and even beyond our galaxy. And it's taken many, many years for them to get the high-resolution photos they've gotten and the detail and so forth. But they've come to a consensus of what the galaxy is. They've said this has design to it. And that is a truth that we can all understand and all accept. What are other self-evident truths that we can accept, whether we're on one side of the fence or the other? I'm going to start just real basic, not to insult anyone, but rather to say there are truths that every human being can agree on. We need air to drink, or air to breathe, rather. Unless you're a fish, right? Let's start over. You need air to breathe, that's a given. You need water to drink, right? We all, these are just elementary things. Here's another elementary issue. For the miracle of procreation, you need an egg of a woman and a sperm of a man. No matter what side of the issue you're on gay marriage versus protecting marriage for a man and woman, you know that's true. And it demonstrates some design and some natural function that is. There is a difference between men and women, not just physically, but also emotionally. Equal respect under the law, but there is this incredible design of a man and a woman, and when they come together in marriage, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I came to Berkeley last night and I saw an elderly man and woman coming out of the theater holding hands. It was a beautiful thing to see. And I am one of those who believe that it is much more beautiful and inspiring to see two octogenarians holding hands in a park, a man and a woman. They've been married 50 years or 60 years, than it is to see stuff come out of the Hollywood picture screen that is just too much flesh. And so when we look at the beauty of marriage for a man and a woman, I think we can say that it is a natural thing. And our government ought to be promoting good things that are positive, that are natural, for the sake of the children, yes, but also for the sake of just what is natural. There was a bumper sticker on a car I saw yesterday. It said, "Question reality." Now, I hope the guy doesn't drive that way, because there are some lines he has to stay in when he's driving on the road. Otherwise, reality may take the front of his car off and maybe injure him. We need to pay attention to truth. We need to pay attention to reality. We need to pay attention to nature. And I think we can all agree with those concepts. How many of us like to be lied to? Not a single one. We hate being lied to, don't we? Well, what about those who tell us something that's not true, but they sincerely believe that it is true? It just happens to not be true. It happens to be false. Well, you got to be easier on folks who sincerely believe untrue things. But still, that doesn't mean you ought to accept what is false as it is true. And with a respect for nature, with a respect for what is true, I think we ought to look very closely at the elementary truth of a man and a woman in marriage. I'm sure that we all in high school received some type of education about male and female anatomy. It might have been 7th grade for you, it might have been 10th grade. But there are diagrams that shouldn't be put up on the screen here, but they show a clear difference between a man and a woman. A question: are the man's reproductive organs external or internal? A man's reproductive organs are external. How about a woman's reproductive organs? Are they internal or external? Well, it's different from a man. It is internal. And so we see the difference, and then in marriage, you also see the way it works together. There was a fascinating movie that just came out called The Passion. And there was the man who sent Jesus to the cross named Pilate, and he said, "What is truth?" Well, if he had followed around Jesus for his ministry here on earth, he would have heard Jesus say, "In the beginning, the Creator made them male and female. And for this reason, a man shall leave his father and cleave unto his wife, and they shall become one flesh." And whether you believe in God or not, and whether you believe Jesus was saying something absolutely true there or not, the interesting part of that is one fleshness. The act of sexual intercourse, whether it is for the sake of creating children or it is the sake of loving embrace, is a unique act. And it is clear to me that understanding and appreciating the difference between man and woman, male and female, means that marriage between a man and a woman is beautiful, not because it's about sameness, but marriage is about oneness, and it is about completion. Our former panel included former homosexual Alan Chambers, who talked about the emptiness in his heart as he was looking for love in all the wrong places. And then he found his wife, who I believe is here today, and they have a marriage relationship now. If we understand some basic truths about human physiology, human anatomy, and even the sense of oneness that is a bit mystical or spiritual as well as physical, then we ought to say that this is a good thing that ought to be protected. I think that's where the people of California are and the people of the United States of America. Over and over, we see polls that say marriage is for a man and a woman. And the people of California said that as well just 4 years ago. It was a vote of the gut. Now, those on the liberal left like to say, don't vote from the gut, and you're just biased or bigoted or whatever. But what is in the heart can be true as well as false. And when you're asked as a voter, should marriage, the rights of marriage, stay for a man and a woman or not, most people will make a gut reaction, a gut decision, a gut understanding, something they know is self-evident and true, that yes, marriage is for a man and a woman. The rights and benefits of marriage are for a man and a woman. Some of you might remember this. 4 years ago, California voted on Proposition 22, the Protection of Marriage Initiative, asking a simple question: should legally marriage be protected for a man and a woman? And the response was overwhelming. The majority of Californians said yes, 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 protect marriage. Even Governor Gray Davis, he put the hold on domestic partner bills that were chipping away on the uniqueness of marriage for a whole year because he knew how the people voted. And the statistics crossed every single group ethnically you can think of. And here was the Los Angeles Times exit poll from March 7, 2000. Among Hispanics, 65% said protect marriage for a man and a woman. Among blacks, African Americans, 62% said protect marriage for a man and a woman. 59% of Asians, 58% of whites. But it was an overwhelmingly true blue gut vote of the people of California. And they voted correctly because over and over we have seen the intolerant homosexual activists attack marriage, attack parental rights, and attack religious freedom. I wanted to be up here on the panel earlier because when we looked at the issue of religious freedom, will gay marriage ever be pushed upon the church? You had panelists who were promoting gay marriage say, oh, that would never happen. Well, why not? Because we have seen that religious freedom has been trampled in this state. There is a bill that passed last year called AB 196. Gray Davis signed it as governor. It said basically that a business in California could be fined up to $150,000 if the business did not want to hire a transsexual or cross-dressing job applicant. This law, it's the law today, actually applies to religious organizations, religious businesses, such as Bible bookstores, Catholic bookstore, etc., that did not want to hire a man who was wearing a woman's dress, and yet they could be fined up to $150,000 for that crime of conscience. This is not speculation. This is the law, and the San Francisco Chronicle admitted the fines were that much. Then we saw another piece of legislation last year, SB 71, which basically pushed parents out of the decision-making process for sex education in the schools. Instead of getting parental permission before there's certain sexual topics could be taught to children, the topics were going to be taught unless the parents found out about it and intervened. It made it harder on the parents. Again, it was an infringing on the parental rights. So when we see the redefinition or attack upon marriage for a man and a woman, the attack upon religious freedom and parental rights is right along there. All of these bills are being supported by the gay, bisexual, lesbian, and transsexual activists who proudly say, yes, they're LGBT, but what they don't say is how intolerant they are about squashing the religious freedom, parental rights of average people, and even the vote of the people of California. I held up a sign, that was the vote of the people. Then why in the world could any legislator, any politician say they are more than the people, that what they think matters more than what the people think? And we have a bill in Sacramento right now, it'll be at a hearing tomorrow morning, that will create gay marriage, full-blown gay marriage in California, despite what the people voted for. It's an unconstitutional bill, but I guess the values that we hold dear, that the vote of the people is important, that marriage for a man and a woman is important, doesn't really have much respect from arrogant politicians who just want to do what they want, perhaps in order to get acclaim in certain liberal neighborhoods or to get campaign contributions from those who fund their re-election campaigns. It's a disastrous situation when we see the vote of the people being attacked as it is. And so when we talk about the politics of same-sex marriage, the politics is that the people voted to protect marriage, yet the politicians in Sacramento are working to destroy the uniqueness of marriage for a man and a woman. And it's a very sad thing, and I hope that the people will rise up in increasing volume to say, protect marriage, protect my vote. Thank you.
Okay. Again, we're going to hold applause until the end, okay? Thank you very much, not the least of which you got within the 12 to 15 minute window, and I didn't have to give you your last card, so very good. I think we turn next to Ken Sherrill, as I understand, who is the chair of the Political Science Department at Hunter College at CUNY. And he's an expert in public opinion and in political participation, voting, and elections, and has written extensively on these topics, including on gay rights and gay issues.
Can I use the unexpired time?
Absolutely.
All right. First, I want to thank Professor Kane and Mark Levin for organizing this day. It's an honor to have been invited, and it's a wonderful thing to see such an engaged and interested and civil audience. I don't know if we can maintain the lawyer-like and courtly decorum that characterized the first panel, but I think we have to have some goals in life. I also want to indicate that a lot of what I planned on saying already has been said, and that simply is testimony to the quality of the first panel. As Professor Kane has indicated, my academic interests have been largely in the study of public opinion, political participation, and political movements. And I'm going to make some preliminary observations about some public opinion data, and then I want to move on to making some observations about the relationship between the marriage movement and the marriage issue and the movement for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered rights. These latter observations are much more in the realm of informed conjecture and are more intended to provoke discussion than they are to, and dissension no doubt, than they are to be declarations of scientific truths. But, so I'm going to throw them out, not entirely as debating points, but they aren't, firmly based, and I suspect that people here will disagree with some of what I say. First, let me say some things about public opinion. Public opinion on the issue of same-sex marriage, ending discrimination in the right to marry, amending the Constitution to restrict marriage or to expand marriage rights is fluid. There are hardcore supporters, there are hardcore opponents, and there's a sizable majority, a sizable number of people who are somewhere in between. Probably there are more hardcore, intense opponents than there are hardcore, intense supporters, but it's moving. Secondly, and this ties to the fact that public opinion is fluid, is we see that responses to survey questions differ dramatically with the wording of the questions. Thus, while you get a slight majority saying that they favor amending the Constitution to limit marriage to being between a man and a woman, you find that about 2/3 say that they do not agree that it is worth amending the Constitution to limit marriage to a man and a woman. Question structure affects responses, something everybody who does survey research knows. And obviously, the more deeply held the feeling, the less the response is going to be affected by this kind of wording than, or these variations in wording, than it would be if things were deeply held. Finally, I think what's interesting here is that there's been a great partisan divide on this issue. Clearly, people have not been thinking about this issue very much in the past, except for people who feel directly affected by it. And a vast number of voters are instead influenced by the partisan cues that they receive from party leaders. As a result, as the leadership of the Republican Party has gathered around the president in support of an amendment to prohibit, you see overwhelming Republican response that there should be such an amendment or that marriage should be limited, as virtually every Democratic candidate for the Democratic nomination has taken positions on this. You see overwhelmingly Democratic responses on the other side. People are choosing their positions on the issue on the basis of the positions of their preferred party rather than choosing candidates and parties on the basis of the issue, or as much, if not more so. Let me give you some fast numbers, and then I'll get to more interesting stuff. Just to provide a little context, you see here that 43% of the American people completely agree with the statement that it's all right for blacks and whites to date each other, and that 23% of the American people either completely or somewhat disagree with that statement. When asked whether they agreed or disagreed that marriages between blacks and whites are not a good idea, 65% disagreed and 27% agreed. This is Pew data from Princeton Survey Research Associates, done about 30 years after the Supreme Court announced Loving v. Virginia. And here are some data on the number of interracial marriages in the United States. And you see that this has gone from less than 0.5% in 1980 to a little bit over 2.5% in 2000. That is, in a 20-year period, the percentage increased fivefold, about 500%. I'm not presenting these data for the purpose of making a direct analogy, but rather for the purpose of indicating that public opinion isn't always unanimous on the side of the good people. Here are changing attitudes toward homosexuality itself. And you can see that in 1983, 58% of the American people thought it was not acceptable, and 32% thought it was acceptable. In 2003, it's 49% thinking that it's not acceptable, and 46% saying acceptable. You note the decline from 52% in 2001 to 2003, and this no doubt reflects the increasing partisan polarization of the issue and of the kinds of signals that Americans are getting from elected officials. That said, there's some changes here on marriages and so on. In October of 2000, 42% of the American people favored civil unions and 54% opposed it. Today the numbers have reversed. 54% favor it and 42% oppose it. And one of the interesting stories of the same-sex marriage debate is how rapidly civil unions became a moderate position. Do you think marriages between homosexuals should be recognized? The law is valid. It's gone from 27% in 1996 to 33% now. It's a change, not a huge change, but a significant one, especially in a brief period of time. I had one other slide, but I have one other I'm going to raise later. Okay, that at least temporarily ends the public opinion piece of it. I'm going to make 5 suggestions about what the marriage issue says about. Does that include his unused time? What the marriage issue says about the movement. The first is that even at the level of leadership, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender rights movement is far more pluralistic and diverse than is usually assumed. And here, this may sound a little bit unusual, but there is a big difference between the agendas and timetables of the legal judicial wing of the movement and the electoral lobbying wing of the movement. I don't think anybody who regularly works with elected officials wanted them, that is the elected officials, to have to deal with the same-sex marriage decision within a few months of the sodomy decision and during a presidential election year. While we know the electoral timetable in advance, we don't know and we don't control the timetable on which courts operate and when courts are going to reach decisions. But more significantly, I think that the success of the movement for equal rights at the elite level, at the lobbying level, at the Washington level, has resulted in a more mature movement in the sense that people who are players in Washington and who regularly interact with elected officials stop having a purely adversarial relationship and start understanding the needs of their friends as much as they expect their friends to understand our needs. As a result, we would have no reason to ask, to place our elected supporters at the kind of risk that some people would like to put them at as a result of these judicial decisions. Second point, no one understood how much the average lesbian, gay, bisexual person actually wanted equality. The focus of the movement for so long had been on liberty, on the end of criminalization, on the end of sodomy statutes, on the right not to live in fear, on the right to lead your own life, that we had forgotten how much people wanted simple human dignity. Third, I don't think, on this issue at least, that any of the leaders of the movement knew how far they were behind the rank and file. Fourth, I'm going to skip four. The fifth is that no one would knew how quickly civil unions become widely acceptable. Let me just get to this one point about why no one understood how intense. Nobody knew that thousands of people would rush forward in San Francisco and in Portland to get married, that people would stay up in the rain through the night to get married. I mean, no, we didn't expect that kind of intensity. We knew people wanted to get married, but we didn't know they wanted it that much. Now, in retrospect, we should have known it, and we should have known it for two reasons. One reason, purely and simply, is the baby boom. The fact that over the past 15 or 20 years, same-sex couples have had more and more children. And the fact that you have children means you want your children protected. And, you know, we missed the emotional investment that parents have in their children. I mean, it sounds crazy, but, you know, we have children and we care about them. And second is we missed the exponential growth or the political consequences of the exponential growth of same-sex households. Between 1990 and 2000, the percentage zoomed. I will stop.
Thank you. That was very good, but we do have to observe our rules. Okay. Robert Knight is the director of the Culture and Family Institute, which is an affiliate of the Concerned Women for America. Before that, he had a career as a journalist, I was interested to note, and was director of cultural studies at the Family Research Council. So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and I do want to thank Mark Levin and Professor Kane for putting this together, and Randy Thomason for his help in making sure we had a balanced presentation. I think it's been a remarkably balanced panel so far. I hope all of you were here for the first one. I don't think anybody's come just for this one. You did mention I was a journalist myself. I work. It's good to be back in California. I was an editor at the Los Angeles Times for 7 years, and one thing that drove me into journalism was getting to the bottom of things. Nothing galls me more than when I think I hear untruths being uttered. Randy mentioned that we all care about truth. We want the real stuff. We don't want to be told something that isn't true. And yet, I will say that after 15 years in journalism, and now almost 15 years on the other side of the mic, I've never seen an issue treated with such bias in the press as the gay rights issue. There are a number of myths that have been promoted over the years that were designed to shift public opinion, and I think, as Ken Sherrill demonstrated, public opinion has shifted, and I think it's because people have gotten largely a one-sided view of this whole thing. The first myth was the 10% myth, that 10% of the population is gay. That came out of the old discredited Alfred Kinsey sex studies. More recent figures indicate it's less than 3%, probably less than 2%. In fact, the Human Rights Campaign itself, in its brief in the Lawrence case, cited a study that said I think it said it for men about 2.8% and about half of that for women. So they've acknowledged it's been wildly inflated. But one gay activist several years ago admitted that, of course, we inflated it. It helps create the impression this is a bona fide minority group, like blacks or Hispanics. So people start thinking of us as a minority instead of people who do something sexually different. Another myth is the born that way myth, that studies have shown that there is some sort of genetic component to homosexuality. Now, I think Alan Chambers and thousands of people like him are living proof that it's not genetic. There was an article in the Washington Post just a couple months ago, and it was about a group of studies of young women in college who were shifting back and forth in their sexuality. And they were doing a longitudinal study, and after a 5-year period, 75% of the girls in the study had shifted how they identified themselves, from heterosexual to homosexual, often back to heterosexual, very fluid. And I don't know what you do with bisexuals as far as a gene. Is there a bisexual gene? I don't think so. I think there's sexual confusion, not a bisexual gene. One thing Simon LeVay said, and he did the first very publicized gay study in the early 90s out of the Salk Institute. He said, "It's important to stress what I didn't find. I didn't prove homosexuality is genetic or find a genetic cause for being gay. I didn't show that gay men are born that way, the most common mistake people make in interpreting my work, nor did I locate a gay center in the brain. Since I looked at adult brains, we don't know if the differences I found were there at birth or if they appeared later." Given that all his homosexual subjects had died of AIDS, and AIDS does affect brain structure, that's a pretty good bet that some of them may have been affected by that. The other studies that were trotted out have either been discredited, none of them have been replicated, not a single one, and they suffer from huge methodological flaws. This was brought out by Drs. Bine and Parsons at Columbia University in an article in 1993. They looked at all the studies and said not one of them is worth citing. Another myth I've seen, in fact, I was debating Winnie on Crossfire once, and I didn't know it until later when I looked at the tape that it flashed on, we were doing a gay parenting debate, and it flashed on the screen. According to the ACLU, 6 to 14 million children are being raised by gay parents. Now, let's look at this for a minute. First, the census shows that there are less than 600,000 gay households with gay couples. And of those households, only about a third of them have children, so now we're down to about 200,000 households. Now, if there truly are 6 to 14 million children being raised by gay parents, that means every last homosexual in this country is raising 7 or 8 kids. I don't think so. It's ludicrous, and yet I've seen that repeated by the New York Times. I've seen it everywhere. Nobody examines these things. That's one thing that drove me crazy at the LA Times. I was editing a story about gay cruising in Laguna Beach in Orange County, and this was during the mid-'80s. And I was astounded. It was a typical LA Times story, 80 inches long. It jumps from page to page. Got to do around the real estate ads. And it said, wow, these gay men seem very reluctant to cruise anymore, and there's a change in the pattern. And it didn't say a word about AIDS. And AIDS was raging in the mid-'80s. So I went to the assigning editor, and I said, hey, why don't we mention AIDS? That's the prime topic in the gay community. Why aren't we talking about this? And he goes, hey, I know that, and you know that, but if we put that in there, then people will link homosexual activity with AIDS, and then that'll breed homophobia. In other words, let's lie to our readers in the service of a political agenda. And that's the way this issue has been portrayed to Americans for the last 20 years. It's that bad. The bias is that profound. Another one, among all those myths out there, there's so many. The gay parenting studies that purport to show that children are no different if they have 2 lesbians in the household and not a mother and a father. I don't know how many of you out there would think that your dad could be replaced by a lesbian and you wouldn't notice. I sure would notice. I got very special things from my father, and I got very special things from my mother, and they were very different. And children deserve a chance at that kind of household. And this is not to deprecate the parenting abilities, the commitment, the love that a lot of gay parents show their kids. You know, I'm not here to do that, because I think a lot of them feel very strongly about protecting their kids. But that doesn't mean that something's not missing in a gay household. When you have a homosexual household, the kids are missing out on looking at three important relationships between men and women, between mothers and fathers, and between husbands and wives. They don't see any of that. One entire sex is missing, and they're told, don't notice this. Mom and mom are going off in the bedroom, but don't notice that. This is not fair to kids. This is not about what's best for kids. It's about the desires of homosexuals to have families. And that's a very human desire, but it's, if you put children's interests first, public policy ought to reflect a bias toward married couples. When possible, we should be placing kids in mother and father married households. The sociological evidence is overwhelming that kids do better in those households. Kids that don't have a father are in a single-parent household, and this, again, not to deprecate single parents, many of them who are wonderful parents. But without the mother and father structure there, these kids are less likely to attain educational attainment. They're more likely to get into sexuality early. They're more likely to experiment with drugs. Every indicator you will find of social pathology, you will find higher in households that aren't established male-female married households. This is the gold standard, and we're messing with it at our own peril. Now, it's one thing, we are a free country, and two homosexuals can say, look, I'm married and I've pledged myself to my mate, but when they bring the law into it, they bring us all into it. This is a very public act, which is why we're concerned with it at all. Marriage wasn't created as a way to discriminate. It's protected in the law because it's essential to civilization to have mothers and fathers committed to each other. It wasn't created to deprecate other relationships, and other relationships do not provide what marriage does to society. It wasn't invented to annoy people who have same-sex sex. It's far more important than that. Now, gay marriage is an oxymoron in and of itself, because you're talking not about just tinkering with the relationship. You're talking about the bringing together of the two sexes, ejecting an entire sex from the relationship and saying it's the same thing. That's quite a claim. Earlier, in one of the earlier panels, one of the panelists said something about an analogy to chess, changing the rules of chess. That was a very interesting analogy. He said something about either a rook going another way or a knight moving sideways, or one of the lesser pieces. I think a better analogy would be to get rid of the queen and have two kings, or perhaps get rid of the king and have two, or get rid of the queen and have two kings. And vice versa. You would say it would fundamentally sunder the game. It would change its very essence. It's not tinkering around like the designated hitter rule. I'm one of those guys that's not all that excited about that, being an American League fan. But really, this is profoundly important. How much time do I have left? A couple minutes? 6 minutes? Great. Okay. Now, you think about what marriage does. It's about more than two people. Any parents who have kids and they're worried about what they're going to do in the back seat knows it's going to profoundly affect more than those two kids. It's going to affect two families. Marriage is the fundamental element of society because it determines hereditary traits, family names, it's how family property is handed down, it's how kinship patterns develop. You're talking about family trees. And now we're talking about taking a limb that is not extending the family tree but cutting it off and giving it the same recognition. Now, in 1971, two homosexual men tried to get married in Minnesota. The state Supreme Court dismissed their claims, saying, quote, "The Constitution does not require things which are different in fact or opinion to be treated in law as though they were the same." And thousands of years ago, Aristotle once said it's a crime to treat unequal things as equal, because when you destroy distinctions, you destroy truth. Now, all men and women do have equal rights to enter marriage. You just have to meet the requirements. I think one of the other earlier panelists said that. I think it was Carol Migden who said, yeah, we're just meeting the requirements. Well, yeah, you have to have one spouse of each sex to meet the requirements. If you have two women or two men, you're not meeting those basic requirements. You have a relationship, but you don't have marriage. In a lesbian household, in a generational sense, you've eliminated the father, an uncle, a grandfather in that household. You may have acquired one outside somehow, but not in that household for those children to observe. Same goes for a male homosexual household. Where's mom? Are mothers suddenly irrelevant to children because two homosexual men decide they want to have kids? Again, it's not about the kids. It's about their agenda and what they want in life. And there's just a profound lack of concern for the welfare of the kids, I believe. Again, these could be the greatest guys in the world. They could be loving, wonderful guys, but they've created a motherless household by design, and that's not where public policy should be. Now, the main question I get asked in these debates all the time, and Barney Frank asked me, he said, hey, how does my relationship hurt your marriage? You know, why should you care what I do? Well, I don't. He's trying to make me care by making it public business and turning it into public policy. And it does affect us many ways. Businesses are forced to subsidize homosexual relationships regardless of the most deeply held beliefs of the business people. Randy alluded to that. In California, you either press this agenda or you get fined. You can't even contract with a state anymore in California if you don't offer domestic partner benefits. What if you're a devout Christian, Jew, or Muslim, and you don't want to subsidize something God tells you is wrong? That puts that person in the position of choosing between God and Caesar. And in a free America, that should never happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our last presentation before we go to question and answer is with Winnie Stackelberg, who is the political director for the Human Rights Campaign based in Washington, D.C., which works on public policy issues related to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender equality rights.
Thank you. I want to add my thanks to the previous panelists and to all of the folks here who organized this afternoon's discussion. I flew across the country to be here. I'm taking the red eye back tonight so that I can wake up with my kids tomorrow morning. And it's important for all of us to have this discussion. There's always a time in a panel discussion like this where you've got your prepared remarks, and there have been so many things said by other panelists, both on your side and the opposite side, that you say, should I stray from my notes and address the myths and the facts that have been mentioned before? I think what I will do is not stray from what I wanted to say walking in this room, and hope that during the question and answer period we have a chance to talk about, challenge, and address some of the points that have been made in the previous panel as well as this panel. I'd also like to not go over the ground that was covered in the earlier panel, and I'd like to note for the record that there were 8 lawyers, and there only are 4 of us doing the politics, so that says something about law and politics, which I'm not sure is good or bad. And finally, I want to say that this is a panel on politics, and so again, rather than go over public opinion that I think was presented very impressively, and rather than go over some of the cultural issues that have been raised in the previous panel and this one, I'd like to spend some time talking actually about the politics of where we are. To do that, I have to, I think, step back a little bit and talk about the near term, which I think is about now through the election in November 2004, November 2nd, 2004. So that's sort of the near term. And then the longer term, the 2006 elections, and then beyond that, because I think the politics of all of this is very important. I also have to remind people, and I think everyone in this room knows, but I ought to say it just because it's what we debate in Washington, what exactly is marriage? And I've heard a lot of people discuss what it is and what it's not. Do remember that state and federal government sanctioned marriage is a civil marriage license. It's a piece of paper that confers, and now according to the GAO, not 1,049 rights and benefits and protections and responsibilities, but 1,138 rights and benefits and responsibilities and protections to individuals. So it is about benefits and protections, and while, as Kate Kendall said, civil unions is a great step in the right direction, domestic partnership law here in California, a great step in the right direction, it bears repeating that civil unions and the domestic partner law here do not confer those 1,138 federal rights, benefits, and protections: Social Security survivor benefits, access to family and medical leave, hospital visitation for hospitals who would choose to not confer that visitation to same-sex partners. And while that's a legal distinction, it also has a lot to do with the politics of this, because the opponents of same-sex marriage equality have realized that, as you heard in the earlier panel, that the courts are making decisions state by state, some wins for the same-sex equality movement and some losses. But in Massachusetts, the Supreme Judicial Court, the highest court in the state of Massachusetts, back in November of 2003 said, well, according to our own state constitution, gay people in the state of Massachusetts can get married. And while a constitutional change to the Massachusetts Constitution could undermine the Supreme Judicial Court's ruling in that case, that won't be able to take effect because of the laws of the state of Massachusetts until no sooner than November of 2006. So sometime between when marriage licenses begin to issue in Massachusetts on May 17th of this year, which coincidentally is the 50th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education desegregation case, when those licenses issue, and November of 2006, when the people will have a chance to vote on the Supreme Court's ruling, marriage licenses will issue in Massachusetts no matter what happens. And because the opponents of same-sex marriage equality saw that, and now I'm talking purely from politics, I'm not talking the rightness or wrongness of marriage equality, the opponents saw that, they said, well, how can we block states from doing this? Whether you agree with it or not, the only way to do so would be to pass an amendment to the federal Constitution, to the United States Constitution, something that has been done very rarely in this country, only 17 times since the Bill of Rights. It's never been done to constrict or restrain or constrain rights, always done to expand liberties and protections, except in the case of prohibition, and that caused kind of a mess. So the Goodrich case in Massachusetts comes down. The opponents of marriage equality decide that we ought to amend the federal Constitution. And again, as the political director of the Human Rights Campaign, one of our biggest near-term, short-term challenges is defeating a constitutional amendment. The process for amending the Constitution is 2/3 of the Senate and 2/3 of the House have to ratify the constitutional amendment that gets passed out to the states, where 3/4 of those states need to ratify it. So our goal, again, near-term, short-term, not talking about long-term marriage equality, but our short-term goal is defeating a constitutional amendment. That means we need 34 senators or 146 House members to block the constitutional amendment. And you know, what we do is we lobby members of Congress. We bring people in from districts and from states all around the country to say to their legislators, you would be discriminating against me. This would be the effect of passing a constitutional amendment. Now, all of that is well and good, and we've been moving along, and then all of a sudden in 2004, in February, President Bush decides that he is going to weigh into this debate. And without going into the motives of opponents or supporters of this debate, many believe that President Bush's, while he believes that marriage is between a man and a woman, the same position as the Democratic nominee John Kerry has, a great disappointment to me and to my organization, but notwithstanding that, the same position as President Bush has, that many people believe that he waded into that debate because of politics, not because he holds this belief, which he does, same belief that John Kerry, but because of the short-term election fight that's coming up. You might remember back in 2000 when Karl Rove looked at the post-election landscape and said there were 4 million Christian conservatives that didn't show up in 2000. That's one of the reasons why the election was so close. What can we provide as an issue in the 2004 elections that will in fact generate votes for the Republicans, for the base voters? And again, I'm not speaking to anyone's motives, I'm just sort of laying out the politics of this. So here we are facing a national battle in Congress to amend the United States Constitution in the midst of a presidential race. And Professor Sherrill may in fact be right that none of us really welcome that discussion and debate in the midst of a presidential election year, but here we are, here it is nonetheless, and we're certainly going to have to deal with it. The process has been sort of an interesting one. Normally in Congress, it is the House of Representatives, or at least recently, that has been the body that has moved more quickly on gay and lesbian issues than the Senate. There have been votes on denying gay and lesbian residents in the District of Columbia, for example, the ability to adopt children. And that was a House of Representatives vote. The Senate didn't pick it up. There was an effort in the House of Representatives to overturn President Clinton's executive order that said discrimination shouldn't exist in the federal workplace based on sexual orientation. Again, it was a House-driven effort, had nothing to do with the Senate. But interestingly, in this case, in this election year, in this legislative session, it is the Senate that tends to be moving faster than the House. And Tom DeLay and Dennis Hastert and the leaders of the House Judiciary Committee, Sensenbrenner and Shabbat, the two Judiciary Committee chairs who have this issue, have actually sort of counseled a wait-and-see approach. Let's not take the huge step of amending the Constitution right now. We have a federal law, the Defense of Marriage Act, which was passed overwhelmingly by the Congress in 1996 and signed into law by President Clinton. So why are we doing this right now? There's a law that seems to be taking care of this problem, and we're not quite sure whether it will fall to a constitutional challenge or not, but let's not take that step now. The Senate, on the other hand, is moving much more swiftly, and when you talk to Republican and Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate, which we do quite frequently, they will tell you, I think, to a person that again, it is politics that's driving the timing on all of this. As you all know, John Kerry's home state is Massachusetts. The Democratic Convention happens to be in Boston, Massachusetts at the end of July this year. And there's a lot of talk in Washington political circles about the best time to make John Kerry vote for or against a constitutional amendment. Now, he's already stated very clearly over and over and over again that he is not for gay marriage. He has also stated very clearly that he is not for changing the Constitution to block gay marriages. And I think the short-term political fight is about those two issues, gay marriage on the one hand and changing the Constitution on the other hand. And one of the jobs of the Human Rights Campaign and others in Washington is to try to create the space in the middle so that Republicans and conservatives and libertarians can actually say, look, I'm not for gay marriage, but I also don't think you ought to use the Constitution in this overtly political way. And that's one of the debates that we're having now. So people like Ward Connerly, for example, who has been on the side of many anti-affirmative action campaigns, whether it's in California or nationwide, and has never been seen as a hero to the progressive community, champion of gay rights for that matter, has said, we ought not amend the Constitution in this way for this social issue. That's not how you use the United States Constitution. I think it's interesting, too, that Randy Thompson mentioned the polling coming out of the Knight Initiative and focused on a couple of groups, Latinos and African Americans, because I think the other piece of the politics is not only to drive up your base of supporters, but also as a wedge issue, to suppress turnout in certain key Democratic constituencies and communities. And I think there is one can overread polls. It is absolutely true that in the African American community, like in many communities, white community isn't much different, there is not overwhelming support for marriage rights for same-sex couples. That is true. But when you ask the question about, do you support changing the Constitution in this way, Latinos and African Americans don't support that either. And so it's a question of how the politics cuts. Is it going to be a wage issue that's going to drive base constituencies away from the Democratic Party? Is it going to be an issue that drives up turnout for the Republicans in November? None of us, I think, in this room know. I like to think that my crystal ball is better than the next person's. But I don't think we know quite yet. But I think we do know that from polling, from our conversations with federal elected officials, there isn't the kind of support for changing the Constitution in this regard, whereas there is opposition in polling that we see over and over again in opposition to marriage rights for same-sex couples. The only thing I think I would end on is something that was mentioned in the earlier panel, which is a third of the American electorate and public opinion tends to be against equality for same-sex couples, whether it's marriage, whether it's amending the Constitution, whether it's banning employment discrimination for gay and lesbian people. And a third of the electorate tends to be with us on that. And it really is that middle third of the country that much of our advocacy around the lobbying and around changing public opinion really must center. And what are those messages? Who are the people who most resonate with that middle third of the country? Now, again, I don't see the end of this playing out in the political realm. I do see how Senator John Kerry is going to be caught in the middle of it, for sure. I think that, again, the timing of the vote is all about politics in Washington, and it remains to be seen when exactly that vote will be orchestrated.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all four participants, Robert, Ken, and Winnie, and this will be on UCTV. It will be put on our website, so lots of people will get to view the discussion. I want to thank everybody for the politeness of the audience. You guys get an A+ for observing the IGS rules, and I think it made for a better discussion. So thank you for coming.